This is Amy, and you're listening to the Talkin' Appalachian podcast. Hello, welcome back to the podcast. I'm so glad you're with me. I've got a little bit of everything in today's episode. I've recorded a couple of episodes where I talked about how the way a person spoke can be preserved in letters, diaries, recipe books. The most recent one is episode 72. That's because we have to be formally taught to write, but we can learn to speak as babies by listening to the people around us and watching their lips form words. So the less formal education a person had, the more they would write the way they spoke, spelling words as they would have pronounced them instead of using standard spellings. And we like that in sociolinguistics because it gives us insight about how people sounded before there was audio recording. My mom surprised me recently with some World War II-era letters that my great-grandfather had written home to my great-grandmother in January of 1945. We only have 3 of them, but it's enough to know that he was really homesick for her and their 2 kids. And one of those kids was my grandmother, who passed in January. He calls her darling and dear throughout the letters, which I never remember him saying when he was alive. So I think that's an example of how people will code switch when they're writing to add sentiment. Letters were the only means of communicating with loved ones then, and they waited so long to get one that the letter writer knew it needed to be meaningful, and they needed to make that sentiment last until the next letter. But his voice, his true voice, the one that I remember, came out in a couple of phrases in this letter. He first says, "They ain't but one thing I want, home, you, and the kids." And later he says, in closing, "They ain't much to write about." And in both of these phrases, he's using they for there followed by ain't. Now, they for there is noted as a Scottish form, and it was recorded as early as 1774 in letters documenting Dunmore's War. Now, this is from the Dictionary of Southern Appalachian English that was edited by Michael Montgomery. Dunmore's War was a conflict between the British colony of Virginia and the Shawnee and the Mingo in the upper Ohio Valley. And over 250 years later, it continues to be spoken throughout the southern region of Appalachia. We also found some old recipe books of my great-grandmother's that were over 70 years old. And there were several what we call artifacts of her spoken voice in those books. One example was the way she spelled the word syrup, which you would normally see as S-Y-R-U-P, but she spelled it twice the way she pronounced it, syrup, S-U-R-U-P. And one recipe I found was called masculine potato salad, which called for the cook to, quote, chop good strips of bacon, in this case meaning thick strips. Good is another word for a sizable portion when you're talking about food. You cut those into small pieces, you fry it in the skillet, you add to cooked potatoes and diced onions, and you toss it with vinegar, salt, and pepper. It sounds really delicious. She also wrote that you were to pull up onions in the full dark of the moon and make kraut in the old moon. Now, to understand harvesting and cooking in certain phases of the moon, you have to know about the signs. You can listen to my early episode on that for more details, but basically it's an Appalachian practice of planting and harvesting that's aligned with the 12 signs of the zodiac as well as the moon phases, and that tells you the best times for planting, harvesting, and putting up your crops. And this time of year especially, people are very aware. The people who still follow the signs are very aware of that as they're thinking about what they're planting now. Mama also recorded birth and death dates, the weather, and what she referred to as, quote, Indian remedies for pain. And on one page of her recipe book, she simply wrote what she thought was a pretty name for a girl, which is Ladina. If there's anyone listening whose name is Ladina, my mama thinks your name is pretty. Maybe someone in the family was expecting and she meant to share it with them. We don't know, but I thought that was really interesting. If you want to hear Mama's voice, you can listen to episode 73, where I include oral histories that I recorded in the early 1990s. Those were featured in a January 6th article in The Atlantic, which mentions the podcast as well. Now, if you have things like this in your family, letters or recipe books, and you want to know how they might have sounded, how your family members might have sounded if you don't have them on audio, scan them really carefully for those 3 elements of spoken voice. Words like masculine potato salad, grammar patterns like they ain't none, and phonetic spelling like syrup. I'm always happy to take a look at scans if you'd like some input on whether you're truly looking at dialect or just misspelled words. Just send them to talkingappalachianpodcast@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to look at them. I'm always welcoming Voiceplace stories from listeners, and I have a new one for you from a listener named Tanner. Tanner writes, I first want to say thank you for the work that you're doing through the Talkin' Appalachian podcast. I've recently just discovered it, and it feels so good to hear people talk the way I grew up talking. Not only talking the way I do, but encouraging it and validating it. Tanner, you're very welcome. I grew up in western North Carolina, he writes, in Brevard. My family's roots run deep there. I spent a great deal of time with my paternal grandparents, who taught me all sorts of things from gardening and preserving by the signs to how to build and create things from practically nothing. The most important thing they taught me was how to love my heritage and the people and places I came from. At home, my mama tried her best to coach my brother and I out of our accents. She viewed the accent, as many do, as a form of illiteracy, and somehow it would affect our ability to succeed in the world. From Brevard, I moved to Lynchburg, Virginia, to attend college. There, even more than at home, my accent was challenged, and I, in an effort to fit in, worked hard to distance myself from the vocabulary I was accustomed to and the way that I spoke. And I'll stop here and say that what Tanner is describing is something I've talked about over and over in the podcast, and I think many of us have similar stories and similar experiences with this challenge to acceptance, right? Whether it's family members or people we went to school with. Tanner writes, I'm turning 30 this year. I have a 2-year-old daughter. My grandparents are aging, and I realize that my beloved hometown is becoming more of a tourist hotspot, and the traditional way of life that I grew up knowing is disappearing. I don't say that in anger, it's just the way of the world, and I've come to realize that the way I grew up, and my home voice, as you call it, is special. I want to pass that heritage along to my daughter, and I want to embrace who I am and not try to hide it as a way of fitting in. I think that's such a beautifully written email, and it warms my heart that you are planning on doing that for your child, and if anything about this podcast inspired that, then it makes all of it worthwhile. So thank you, Tanner, for your email. And I just want to encourage anyone else who wants to send their Voiceplace story to talkingappalachian@gmail.com to just send it on. Okay, here's a phrase you might have heard, or maybe you use it. And the phrase is up and, as in, I was just standing there all innocent and she up and slapped me. Or about midnight, he up and died. This is a verb phrase that's recorded in the Dictionary of Smoky Mountain English as early as 1938 in southern Appalachia. It's used to convey a surprising action. So when we combine words this way, particularly verbs and prepositions, and fold them into a sentence, we're going back to our storytelling roots to make those sentences more intense. Here's another one, up in. Now, the Dictionary of American Regional English says that this prepositional phrase is heard throughout Appalachia from West Virginia down to North Carolina, and it usually refers to age. So here's an example from 1938, someone who was interviewed in eastern Kentucky who said, he must be up in 80. In 1943, he's a man up in 30. So that means in his 30s, between 30 and 39 years of age. Here's one from Virginia. I expect he's up in 60. So here's one that refers to how many people came to someone's gathering at their house from 1959, Eastern Kentucky. I've seen 50 eat at our house a many a time and up in 50, so 50 or more. Here's one from West Virginia. It was a problem to keep him from trying to work when he was up in 80 years of age. And they also have one very similar from 1995, North Carolina. Up in or up and. Do you use any of those phrases that way? I'd love to know about it. There's a snack size episode for you today. I hope you'll share your favorite episodes with someone, and don't forget to subscribe on Patreon if you want bonus content that you won't find here on the podcast. Follow Talkin' Appalachian on social and subscribe on YouTube. Every time you like, you follow, you share, that helps get the word out. That helps the podcast. And remember, keep talking Appalachian.